Thank you guys so much for joining us for another episode of Indoor Voices, where we bring in experts and kind of extract out of them all the information that they have to give us about the indoor world. Today we have with us Stephen Leung with Contech, and like before, I'm going to jump right in. Stephen, for all those who will be listening, can you tell me a little bit about what you do and what Contech Inc. does?
Sure, absolutely. Contech is a US-based company located in Spartanburg, South Carolina. We've grown from 2 people to a little bit over 800 people around the world now, and we do have manufacturing in North America, Asia, as well as Europe. The vision of the owners was originally to make cleaning easier and more effective at a good value, and that's what's helped our company grow over the years. The 800 people make products that are found in the world's most critical environments. So you'll find Contech products in pharmaceutical, vaccine manufacturing plants, the semiconductor world, aerospace, automotive, hospitals, as well as homes. So we make cleaning products, and we just try to make cleaning easier and more effective. Now, over the years, I've had a number of different roles with Contech. I've worked in R&D, I've done product development, but really, I've enjoyed working in the marketplace a whole lot. And these days, I spend a lot of time in the restoration industry, as well as in healthcare, training people on how to properly clean and disinfect.
Thank you, Stephen. So Stephen's going to help us with kind of our topic today, which is trends in disinfection. Everything I know about disinfection comes from Stephen Leung. He's been a phenomenal help to me as we've navigated the last year. So Stephen, as we get into the topic a little bit, can you give us a little bit of a glimpse of what your world looked like from February 2020 to now?
Yes, so over the past year, everyone's experienced a lot of change. You know, when the pandemic first hit, there was a run on disinfectants. I mean, people couldn't get enough of it. People who had never used disinfectants before were buying it up and putting it to use. And I think after about 3 months, we saw supply catch up with demand. But as we entered into the summer, people involved in education, as well as a lot of offices, were trying to figure out how do we get our students or our workers back to work safely. And so the rush that had been started with disinfectant wipes actually seemed to pick up. And so wipes have been in short supply pretty much up through about now. And so there's been that. And then, of course, as people put wipes and disinfectants to work, then there became a greater awareness of what are all these disinfectants doing to us? And there were some issues around overexposure. And so people started looking around and making some more decisions. And fortunately, there was greater availability of disinfectants. And so, of course, I think all of us have come face to face with pandemic fatigue. And so as the pandemic has kind of progressed into the vaccination phase now, I think people are a little bit tired and really ready to go back to whatever normal was. And I think as we move forward, the vaccination is going to give us some flexibility that we didn't have even just a couple of months ago.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So you know what we do at Millicare Floor and Textile Care is floors. So I'm going to pull you into my world for a second before we pilot back out to the disinfection industry at large. Can you comment on disinfecting floors, both kind of hard and soft surfaces?
Yes. When it comes to disinfecting floors, I think people's mindset has morphed a little bit over the past few months. Floors were given a lot of attention because, of course, floors get dirty. And when you look at a hard floor and the application of disinfectants onto that surface, a couple things come to mind. Most disinfectants are water-based and contain some surfactants. And surfactants are basically detergent. When you have water and detergent on a hard surface, that can be slippery when wet. So there was, of course, the concern about slipperiness when wet. And then, of course, when surfactants dry, if they're not cleaned off with a rinse step, they can build up. And surfactants building up often yields a dry, sticky floor. So as people became a little bit more aware of the vector of transmission for SARS-CoV-2, the virus that causes COVID-19, it became public knowledge that the primary vector of transmission was really not involving the floors. And so I think we've come into an awareness that clean floors are still very desirable. And for most of us, since we don't sit on the floor or eat off the floor, having a good looking floor is probably going to be effective as part of infection prevention or infection containment. And so there may be cases where applying a disinfectant to a floor still makes a lot of sense. But in most cases, I don't really see heavy disinfection, daily disinfection of most public floors a thing anymore. You're still going to find that in hospital rooms, especially where there are isolation cases. But the places that it was traditionally important, it's still important, and the public places not so much so anymore.
No, you're right, and I like that you pulled in like, hey, people are trying to pay attention to that method of transmission, and so I've even gotten some very different questions lately. One of those is that since we know that it's transmitted through like micron-sized droplets in the air, there's very little risk that she'll contact it from touching the surface. So question for you, and it's kind of a big one. Mm-hmm. Have we been over disinfecting? And if so, if we have, what can be or have been some of the consequences?
That's a great question. And certainly, I think as we've kind of walked through this last year and gained a lot of knowledge, everyone can remember back when the pandemic was first very, very widely thought about and acted upon in the US. Equipment like foggers were sold out for months, and people were very concerned about fogging for safety, fogging for health. And I think when, again, the awareness came to be that the primary transmission vectors, not sitting on a couch and touching the couch or a chair even in a lunchroom as much, not a primary transmission vector, people started to back off of addressing those. So, treating things like soft surfaces went from very important to not really as important. The high-touch surfaces, however, still are important to treat. And so we see that. You mentioned the airborne droplets being the primary vector. So there's still a lot of concern around how do you minimize the transmission of those droplets. So we still see some attention given to masks. There's still attention given to air circulation in enclosed spaces like airplanes. You see filtration devices, and people are still marketing devices to address the droplets in the air.
No, that's awesome, and I appreciate that, Stephen. So some new technologies as well have come out, right? So I appreciate you helping us through, hey, what should we do with those surfaces? But apparently there's some technology, maybe it's a new spin on old technology when it comes to antiviral coatings. So these coatings say they have kill claims for up to 90 days. Is that in our future? Can you comment a little bit on that?
I think the antiviral coatings is a fascinating concept, and that would really help to address some big concerns, especially with the high-touch surfaces. We know that currently, if you have an untreated surface and somebody with an illness, be it the flu, the cold, or something else, if they have the infectious materials like the viruses or virus-contaminated mucus on their hands, they touch a surface. If I touch a surface afterwards and then touch my face, touch one of my mucous membranes, I can get that cold or flu or whatever it is. And so with that in mind, these antiviral coatings could be wonderful. I've seen probably two primary technologies out in the marketplace. One has to do with oxides that emit free radicals in the presence of moisture and UV light. For example, titanium dioxide, when it is in moisture, humidity, or water, and UV light, the titanium surface causes oxygen singlets and hydroxyl groups that can break down organic materials such as viruses or bacteria membranes. I've seen another one that I think maybe from a marketing perspective has been illustrated as microspikes that will pop or attenuate bacteria and viruses. The thing about these technologies is, in the US at least, the EPA regulates antimicrobial materials, disinfectants, and treatments. And so when a company has a product, they prove it to the EPA that it actually works, and the EPA reviews the technology and finds that it really does, the EPA grants a registration. I haven't seen a registration for either of these technologies yet, and it could be out there and I'm just ignorant of it. So if you're out there and you work for one of these companies, I'd love to see the information, because I want to be more knowledgeable and I want to be able to speak favorably about these technologies. So help me out if you would, please.
No, that's great. I appreciate your humility there, Stephen. That's why I've pulled you into so many of my projects for disinfectants. And I know we're doing a lot of speculation about the future, but listen, even me wanting to walk into a building is very, very different than previous to the pandemic. So given now that there is a vaccine, what changes do you foresee for the use of disinfectants?
Well, if the vaccines are as effective as they're projected to be, and if the virus doesn't mutate so that the vaccine reduces in its effectiveness, I think what we'll see is a reduction in the use of disinfectants in many public venues. That's, I think, very reasonable, and I think it'd be suitable. There are some places, however, that I think will sustain a higher than pre-pandemic use level for disinfectants. And those venues would include long-term care facilities, retirement homes, as some people call them, as well as doctor's offices. I think you're going to see enhanced levels of cleaning and disinfecting there.
Okay, that's cool. That's cool to know that there's still going to be some presence. I see kind of a huge trend towards healthy workspace from books and certifications like Well Building and Fit Well. How do disinfectants fit into that, healthy indoor environment?
Oh, I think that's a great question. And, over the years, I think the public has just become a lot more aware about issues relating to sustainability. Many of us want to be good stewards of our resources, the earth. We want to take care of it because we and our descendants are going to live here. And so with that in mind, I think one of the things that became popularized a few years ago was the notion that botanical products are more sustainable. And that was definitely a step in the right direction based on where we were and where we now are. But I think over the recent past, people who spend a lot of time thinking about sustainability have actually gone a level or two deeper. And so when you talk to people who ponder sustainability and how to be a better steward of their resources, they look at things like energy consumption of a process, water consumption, the impact on oxygen and the depletion of oxygen. It's the carbon footprint of the whole supply chain. And so, one of the interesting things that has come to light is that some of the botanical products that have been marketed actually consume more energy and have a greater waste effluent than some of what people would term to be synthetically generated or made in a chemical plant versus a natural plant product. So sustainability is now a little bit more sophisticated. And I think that's actually a very constructive progression.
No, that's cool. That's cool. So when it comes to the EPA and all of the different testing that they do, right? And we know disinfectants are there to kill microorganisms. I know they've got this designation called DFE, or Design for the Environment. Can you explain what that designation means for disinfectants?
Sure. When it comes to disinfectants, the EPA has told manufacturers of disinfectants that we're not allowed to use the word safe. And that's because in the EPA's perspective, anything that kills is inherently unsafe. So that's their perspective, and certainly the government has to come up with definitions for common use and common understanding. And so if a disinfectant manufacturer is not allowed to say that their product is safe, how do we express the level of potential human impact or environmental impact a product has? They came up with this designation, Design for the Environment, or we abbreviate it as DFE. So what DFE is it's an assessment of all the raw materials, the ingredients that go into a disinfectant, as well as when you combine those raw materials into a product, there may be a synergistic effect. And so the EPA looks at the impact of each raw material as well as the finished product on the environment. And I think one of the things that's actually kind of interesting is that some of the botanical products that are out there that are marketed as plant-based, they actually don't qualify for DFE designation. And so again, looking at sustainability, looking a little bit deeper than just did it come from a plant or not, it's a very positive progression.
So Stephen, thanks so much for kind of explaining that there's more to DFE than just the person, right? Even though that's a major portion of it, the environment, the sustainability, how it's made is also a big deal. But there's also some things there that have already been in place. And I think the folks in the restoration industry kind of knew that before the pandemic because they pay really close attention to OSHA standards. So could you bring that into this conversation? What kind of OSHA standards can help us with maybe how disinfectants will be used going forward?
Just in case you're not familiar with the acronym OSHA, OSHA stands for the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. It's a government agency that basically regulates anything to do with workplace safety. So as you mentioned, with the restoration industry, a lot of your restoration technicians deal in situations where there can be something biological that's not safe. So whenever there's blood or other potentially infectious material, it could be blood-laced vomit or an infectious biological material. And if it's a commercial work setting or somebody is involved from work, OSHA cares. So OSHA has this standard that they call their bloodborne pathogen standard, which very simply ensures that disinfectants meet a certain strength or efficacy. They basically need to be able to neutralize the commonly encountered bloodborne pathogens. And so some of your products that are available commercially do not meet this. And if you're in a workplace type of environment where you're concerned with the safety of your workers, consider the OSHA bloodborne pathogen standard. You can find out a lot more on the internet.
Awesome. So Stephen, we're going to pilot into your world a little bit more. Who is kind of your typical client?
As you mentioned, I work a lot with the restoration industry. And what's neat about the restoration industry is that there's a wide range of clients. You have some restoration companies that are very big and they deal with large commercial losses. So for example, with this recent polar vortex, you had some very large facilities experience burst pipes and water loss. There's some big companies out there that have teams that come in from all over the country to whatever the local venue is that has experienced a weather issue or incident. And they start to work on cleaning up floodwaters. You've got small companies, local companies that specialize in helping businesses and people's homes. And so depending on the type of loss that's involved, what's neat about the restoration industry is there's a wide range of things that they work on, everything from carpet cleaning all the way up through biological hazards and forensic restoration. I also work a lot in the healthcare industry and long-term care facilities. And so now you're dealing with a building where people who a lot of times are not well come in and they hope to see some restoration of their health there through some of the professionals, or perhaps it's a long-term residence where somebody who's retired and maybe needs a little bit of assistance now goes to enjoy the fruits of their labor from their life, and people help them out with whatever support that they need.
No, that's awesome. And you told us a little bit about this already in your answer. What are some of their concerns around disinfection? And then let me double in, how are you meeting those needs too?
Yeah, so when you look at the different situations, I find that it's a blend of common factors. People, of course, are looking for something that works to address whatever their health concern is. So if it's a pathogen like mold, it's got to kill mold. If it's an infectious disease, they want to know that it's going to actually kill that. But along with something that kills a pathogen, you want it strong enough, but probably not too strong, because something that's too strong can destroy the surface that is being treated, and nobody wants their furniture or equipment destroyed. There are some user issues related to things like, how does the product smell? Does it leave a residue that's unsightly or sticky? And then, of course, price is a big factor whenever people have to pay for something.
There we go. So like you said, many folks like to settle on like one disinfectant that suits their needs, but yet there are still varying approaches to disinfection that have emerged from our experiences over the past year. What would you say are some of the popular approaches to disinfecting my space?
I think if there was an easy button in life, we'd all push it. And in disinfectants, people are looking for that easy button as well. One of the things I think we found over the last year is that regardless of what equipment you use, there is a need for proper cleaning before disinfection. So that unfortunately is not easy because often it involves wiping a surface or brushing or rinsing a surface, and that's just what it is. All that said, there are still a handful of personal preferences which people have to dial through. It could be the smell of a product. It could be the effect on a surface, or does it leave a residue behind? But depending on what the needs of your specific situation or space are, there are processes that can be put in place to complete that disinfection. And so I think some of the more common considerations I come across these days involve sustainability, as we spoke about a little bit earlier. People are wondering, what am I doing, and is it going to impact the occupants of the building as well as the environment? So it's a complicated answer. I know it's a little bit of a gloss over to your question, but Brian, I think it really boils down to individual situation and individual preferences.
All right, Stephen. So when it comes to maybe known cases versus proactive disinfection, are there differences in approaches there?
I think so. And this goes back to the risk assessment that's appropriate for that specific venue. On a regular basis, especially now, we're treating surfaces and environments as if there's going to be a present potential for infection. And so what that looks like in an office environment may look a little bit different than a manufacturing or a healthcare or a home where you have a lot of visitors. So looking at, what's your routine and potential for infection level will determine how much or how little you feel like you need to clean. But when there has been a situation where somebody tests positive after visiting, or you become aware of that, that they weren't feeling well and just didn't want to break the appointment out of courtesy and an attempt to be considerate, there are some things that are still commonly done. The first thing is because we understand that the primary vector for infection is airborne, if there's been an area where contamination from projectiles of particles that come from talking, you'll want to treat all of those areas. If there are soft goods that you feel like may have been contaminated, you treat the soft goods as appropriate. In some cases, that means laundering. In other cases, that may mean sanitizing or rinsing off. So depending on the materials, that could be a whole course of study, actually. So I think you've got to look at what's present there, how wide is the radius, how big an area, and what does that look like? So hard to go into more details without some specific situational details, but that's a general approach.
No, I appreciate that, Stephen. And I wanted to draw that out because I want folks to know there are very different ways to just approach a situation. And I think you had mentioned it just from a risk standpoint. So with all those questions, you've taken us through a lot of the world of disinfection. I'm sure there's more to come in the future, but Stephen, thank you so much for being on. Folks, thank you so much for watching. And again, thank you, Stephen, and we'll talk to you soon. Thanks for exploring the great indoors with us.
You bet. Thank you.